Good evening. That's a little loud. Everyone can hear, I suspect. My name's Tom Wales. I'm a member of the board here. And as you know, the Athenaeum holds a lot of treasures, a lot of beautiful books, a lot of beautiful art, a lot of other objects. None of it would be accessible to any of us without the efforts of a really fine staff of people. And it's my pleasure tonight to introduce one of the more remarkable members of that staff. Bob Joly has been with the Athenaeum since 2003 as a librarian, and he's now the curator of the Athenaeum's collection of paintings and decorative arts. He studied bookbinding in San Francisco and book conservation at three places: the University of Iowa, the Rare Book School at the University of Virginia, and at the Campbell Center for Historic Preservation Studies in Mount Carroll, Illinois. So without further ado, I give you Bob. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm also the announcer of all other things Athenaeum. So just to bring you up to speed, this is the Arts and Culture series. There are two more lectures in this series on September 12th. Craig Persley will be here from Bath, New Hampshire, and to deliver a talk called Painting a Portrait, a lecture and a demonstration. And in talking to him, he is actually going to produce something right here in this room, right in front of our eyes. That should be pretty fascinating. So that's Thursday, September 12th. The final lecture in this series is by Beth Cannell. She will be speaking on her new book, St. Johnsbury. The title of the talk is St. Johnsbury, Ghosts of 1921. Her book is called Cold Midnight. That is on Wednesday, October 23rd. That will probably be on the second floor. In addition to the Arts and Culture series, we have a couple more readings in the gallery programs coming up through this year. The next one is Wednesday, August 28th, excuse me, a week from today. Ben Tripp will be here, and Christian Duquette. That is here in the gallery at 7 p.m. And there are flyers, not on your seats, but out in the front of the house where you first came in, with the description of the date of the event, but also a biography of Christian and Ben Tripp. So what we're going to do tonight is talk a bit in here. I'm going to show some slides and talk about three particular books that the Athenaeum owns, and then we're going to go out there and actually look at them because I think, oh, it's great to see a lot of information about stuff. I personally love to handle the objects. That's why I like being associated with the objects here in the collections. So if you're thinking the seats are getting hard, 20 minutes tops, start there. So having said that, that's what this slide will show. That's the title page from one of the books I'll talk about. So we'll talk about the books in here. I'm going to demonstrate some tools and materials and care and handling out there. And just a word now, before anybody touches the books, hands up, wipe them off on your pants, on your shirt, and I'm not kidding, or on the paper towels that are out there, because we won't have you wear gloves. And it's safe to do that. You actually can feel the paper, and the books enjoy some handling. But if you're running your hands through your hair, run your hands across your pants first. Or use the paper towels. You'll get the oil off your skin, because the oil will leave a mark, especially on the leather. That would be a bad thing. So handling is good. Gloves not necessary. Clean hands, absolutely. So the three books I will talk about are David Roberts' Egypt and Nubia. That is one book of a 4-volume set. Owen Jones's Grammar of Ornament, which probably lots of you have either heard of or are very familiar with. It's a really seminal book in design from the 19th century. It is still in print. And then William Bradford's Arctic Regions. The Athenaeum owns one of 300 copies, so that is a very rare book. Just in terms of who are these people, when did the books come out? David Roberts is the oldest. He lived from 1796 to 1864. The book Egypt and Nubia was published in 1846. The Athenaeum acquired it in 1872, so quite a while after it was published. There's the accession number, and for those of you who aren't familiar, if you start at number 1 and that's the first thing you acquire, that was the 8,145th thing. And we have an accession book here, but no price was listed for what they paid for that book. That said, it would be really interesting to know. Owen Jones lived from 1809 to 1874. The Grammar of Ornament was published in 1856. The Athenaeum acquired it in 1871. You can see its accession number. It was purchased much earlier than the other two books, closer to the date of its publication. We paid £3, 11 shillings. Many of the books that were in this collection when the Athenaeum opened were printed in London and purchased in London and probably bound there. We tell a story that the books were acquired, they were shipped to London, they were bound, they were shipped back here. Probably a lot of them were acquired in London, bound there, and then shipped here. And the third person is William Bradford. He lived from 1823 to 92. Arctic Regions was published in 1873, and we acquired it just a year later. You can see its accession number. And it was a gift of Franklin Fairbanks, who built the museum. What I'll talk about in all three cases are, what did the author say about the book? Why did they write it? A bit about the structure of the text. So when you're looking at a page, what is it you're seeing? Why are you seeing what you're seeing? And then something on the structure and design of the binding. And I actually have to read this because I don't have a screen in front of me. David Roberts went to the Holy Land in 1838 and 39 to make a visual record of the area. He was the first Westerner to travel so extensively there, and went from Egypt to southern Egypt, northern Sudan, and southern Egypt and northern Sudan is where Nubia is and or was, depending upon your perspective, I guess. He went there to record the sites because that was such an important place. He traveled extensively and did drawings and paintings. Other than his dedication to Louis Philippe, King of the French, David Roberts' words are not present in the text. He didn't write anything about the purpose of the book. The purpose was clear. He was going there to make pictures. His illustrations make clear his intent. The words that certainly are present are those of William Brockton in his introduction to Egypt, Introduction to Egypt, that section of the book. He writes, "Egypt, how remote, how vast are the historical associations this word calls forth." And then he ramps up quite a bit. It not only embraces the entire period of sacred history from Abraham to the Christian dispensation, but Egypt in her profane history issues at once from the mists of time a great and powerful nation. To us, she has no historical infancy. Evidence remains in the vast structures of the valley of the Nile of her maturity 4,000 years ago. Emphasis is on what it was, not what it is. Her social condition at that period, and the earliest historians and the latest and most profound inquirers, here I think he's referring to Roberts, confirm the claim which her imperishable pyramids and temples offer to her ancient greatness. He gives a kind of Western-centric view of art, comparing Egypt to Greece. That goes on for pages and pages and pages. He concludes, from the time of Herodotus, the written history of Egypt is connected. Sorry, I can read, I just can't read well from here. Down to her ignorant and degraded condition in the present day, which the nations of Europe, in their constant communication with her, are in the highest state of enlightenment, yet attained by any community of the human family. Let us hope that a country so favored by nature and its position may yet emerge from such barbarism, and that the changes already offered by Mehemet Ali may lead to the occupation of Egypt by a race and a condition of society worthy of her important position and local advantages. The text talks that way, the pictures don't talk that way. The pictures show the beauty and the historical importance of the place. The text is another matter. The text is letterpress printed, and again, I'm going to show slides of the book. It's not just all this stuff, don't fear. Right after this, there are pictures of the book, and then we will see this book and the other two. It was printed letterpress. The illustrations were produced lithographically by copying Roberts' drawings. Louis Haig was the lithographer, and his name appears next to Roberts on every single plate, meaning David Roberts drew pictures in situ. He's in a place, he's drawing a picture. That picture comes back to England. Louis Haig takes the picture, has to produce an exact copy on a piece of stone, to be reproduced in multiple copies. So he has to be exactly faithful to the original, and he has to be an expert draftsman himself, because he can't be giving you he can't give you a near version. He has to give you the exact thing that Roberts made. So his name appears on every plate. It's almost like artist, lithographer are equally important in the production of this book. Registration marks / holes can be seen on almost every single image. So when you look at the book, when you're looking at a picture on the book, look in the upper left and right corner and the lower left and right corner. This is an early enough book that getting the plates to register, that is, take a sheet of paper and put it on a stone and imprint from that stone, and put it on another stone and imprint from that stone, it is pretty easy to have the registration be off. You've all seen the copy of a newspaper where the color section, the colors are off, and you can hardly see the image. They had to get that straight in a much more mechanical fashion. On all of these images, you'll see little indentations, almost like hanging chads, it occurs to me, or holes through the paper. The book is half bound, not meaning halfway bound, but half bound, leather spine, leather corners, in the style of other Athenaeum books. Many of the ones in this case and the early books were bound in this style, which you'll see a picture of in a minute. The spine and corners are green goatskin, gold tooling. The title and author and volume labels are coordinated colors stuck on the spine. The hubs dividing the spine into compartments are decorative, not a product of the sewing of the text. That will become clear when I show you some things in the other room. Paper for the illustrations is thicker than that of the text-only leaves, and thus it doesn't leave that telltale sign where the lettering shows on both sides of the pages, because you press on the paper so hard, the imprint of the letter shows on the back and would distort the image. So they use thicker paper just to make the printing successful. Here it is, so you'll see this book in the outside, and that's the half-bound style where the spine and corners are leather. The labels are added here, 7 pieces of leather. That's the half-title page, so full-page lithographs. Here's the title page, and it is of Abu Simbel Temple, and that's how it was spelled in the book. And that is a picture of the temple today. I'm sure many of you know this. I didn't even know where Nubia was, so I had to read about this. The Aswan Dam flooded Nubia. So when that dam went in 1956 and was completed by 1960, Nubia ceased to exist for all intents and purposes because it was a Nile community. And the Nile flows north. The Cairo is here. If you're looking at a map of Egypt, Sudan is here. The Aswan Dam is about here. So it flooded everything back down here to about halfway to the Sudanese border. That was Nubia. This temple was entirely removed from the place where it was and was going to be lost by flooding, relocated to higher ground. So it exists, but only because it was moved. And the moving of this temple was coordinated by UNESCO, and this is the project that really ramped up the UNESCO project of, now I have forgotten the term, important places that you don't want to see lost. And there's a program of saying, let's save this, let's not wreck it, let's not take it apart, let's not destroy it by bombing it, let's save it, historically significant cultural places. So this is really the first program that started that. The illustrations here are showing the same piece here. And if you're looking at this line of sand, which is here, the sand would have started here and run, just showing you the top of the doorway down to here. So he is looking at this temple before it was moved. That's it after it was moved. There are tinted lithographs, which is the illustration on the left, and a 3-color tinted lithograph on the right. These are distinguished from chromolithographs, which mean more than 3 colors. So the way this is done, there's a black impression of the image, and in this case, a single tan color is imprinted around this image to give it some depth and some color. Here you've got the black image printed, you've got a tan tint here, and a blue tint here. And those had to be, so the image on the right has 3 stones, 1 for the black image, one for the blue part and one for the tan part, and the registration has to be right. These are some chromolithographs, so 4 color images. The text paper is actually the same color, the photo on the right, just kind of a bad photo I took. Here you can see just a bit of a dot. Let's see here. Right here in this little section, there's a dot. That is a pinhole through that sheet. That is one of the registration marks. So when that sheet is taken from one stone, put on the next stone, there's a chance you can get the registration right. When you don't get the registration right, what you see is this. You've got one color printed here, and you've got the other color printed here, and you can see you can see how they're slightly misaligned here. So we'll see that in the actual book when we're out there. The next book is Owen Jones's Grammar of Ornament. From the preface, Jones writes, "It would be far beyond the limits of the powers of any one individual to attempt to gather together illustrations of the innumerable and ever-varying phases of ornamental art." He does gather 19 cultures' images. He gathers hundreds of images, so he does a pretty good job anyway. All that I have proposed to myself in forming the collection, which I have ventured to call the Grammar of Ornament, has been to select a few of the most prominent types in certain styles, closely connected with each other, and in which certain laws appeared to reign independently of the individual peculiarities of each. It does take a while to penetrate this language. It gets a little clearer here. I have ventured to hope that I might aid in arresting that unfortunate tendency of our time to be content with copying, whilst the fashion lasts, the forms peculiar to any bygone age, without attempting to ascertain, generally completely ignoring, the peculiarities which rendered an ornament beautiful, because it was appropriate, and which as expressive of other wants, when thus transplanted, as certainly fails. He's saying, I am not giving you these images so that you can copy them. I am giving you these images so you can understand why they worked when they worked. If you just copy them, you'll fail. The language is a little dense, but that's what he was saying. He goes on to say, it is more than possible that the first result of sending forth to the world this collection will be seriously to increase that dangerous tendency. And I think, in a large part, that's actually what happened. It is a beautiful book, and you just say, I'd love some wallpaper in that color, or maybe a little more blue, just like that. So he's warning you about what's probably going to happen, and I think it actually did happen in the case of this book. Then he goes on to list 37 general principles in the arrangement of form and color, in architecture and the decorative arts, which are advanced throughout this work. So he's telling you there are lots of principles that these examples are showing you. People have mostly looked at the pictures and said, it is, number one, a beautiful collection of images. The colors are beautiful because of the way it was printed. And one could say, gee, just copy those. They're pretty grand. So it has remained in print. It's a very popular book, but whether it achieved at all what he wanted, I'm not clear. This was, again, letterpress printed, so the text is printed by letterpress. There are 100 plates illustrating 19 cultures or periods of designs, and the final chapter is of leaves and flowers from nature. So Owen Jones drew all of the 19 cultures, and somebody else drew the leaves and flowers from nature. That's the last chapter of the book. Because one of his tenets is that design should come from nature. That is, you're going to see perfect match of form and function in nature. It's not decoration. That's not what he was promoting, like colors will make me happy or something. It has a true function. You'll find it in nature, and looking there is a nice place to start. The full plate, it should say, illustrations are of two types: simple tinted lithographs, as we saw in the last book, or complex multicolored chromolithographs using as many as 8 different colors. The first book had a couple of lithographs using 4. The Grammar of Ornament is a spectacular book, given how many colors there are. So every color meant 1 stone. So if the illustration has 8 colors, a piece of paper went from lithographic stone to lithographic stone, and the stones are probably the size of the top of this podium. So the paper is on this one, the paper is on number 2, number 3, so you've got to register it 9 times if you've got 8 colors, because black is an additional color. So we'll see examples of that. The book is again half bound in the style of other Athenaeum books from the original collection, with a red leather spine and corners of red leather and marbled paper sides and end papers. Oh, right, this is the really unfortunate thing about this book and our copy. In the 1840s and 50s, some books, particularly those with stiff, heavy paper, were bound with natural adhesives. You can kind of guess what happens. They break down. The binding method was quicker than hand sewing and allowed for sewing these big individual sheets, which were not a big sheet folded in half where you could sew through the fold. These are single pieces of paper that you're going to put together one way or another, so they adhesive bound these books. This copy was unfortunately adhesive bound and has, as is in the case of many copies of this book, I actually own this book myself. It is also broken down. In fact, I took it all apart because it's easier to use. The adhesive dried out and it's becoming single leaves. The way we'll look at it is extremely carefully, so we won't make it worse, but you're going to see that it is starting to break down. So there it is, red leather spine, red leather corners, gold tooling on the spine. There's the title page. A contrast of a tinted lithograph in this book and a chromolithograph. That is a typical tinted lithograph. Again, the main image area is printed in black, and then there's an overtone of tan or whatever they would have called it. And the image on the right actually has 8 different colors. There's a close-up of that, and I call these colors just orange, light blue, dark blue, green, yellow, pink, gold, and purple. And then a full-page display. And there are many full-page displays like this in this book, so it's just fantastic to look at. And they'll be on the recto side of the sheet, so the opposite sheet, the left-hand sheet, is blank, so you focus entirely on the image. So it really does present like you could, in fact, this is what happens to these books. People break them, sell the plates, and frame the plates, and that's how some of them end up broken. This is a 2-color, actually, it's really a 1-color tinted lithograph on the left. That's what I should have called it. It's black, and then it's that rust color over the rest of the image. And then an 8-color chromolithograph. And again, a lot of the plates are like this, where in a particular culture, you're seeing, in this case, yeah, I guess it is just 3 per line. So you're seeing that, sometimes you're seeing twice as many images on a single sheet, little tiny squares showing many, many variations on a pattern, but all multicolored like this. 2 more full-page illustrations showing you just how marvelous this book is. And this presentation looks pretty good on a screen. It looks pretty washed out on this screen. So when you see the book, it's a lot more exciting than this. The final book is William Bradford's Arctic Regions. And from Bradford in his A Few Words of Explanation, I love this. This volume is the result of an expedition to the Arctic region for the purposes of art in the summer of 1869. You gotta love that, man. This is not a science expedition. We're not going after seals or whales. We're going after art. And we're taking like 33 people with us. That's nice. This volume is the result of an expedition to the Arctic region for the, from the first essays talking about his own work in painting, my tastes have led me to the study of maritime subjects. Conversing on this topic, meaning he's talking about the expedition, with the late Legrand Lockwood of New York, a man of large heart and sympathy, he generously offered to supply whatever I should need to carry out my objects. So we all know, right? Raise your hand. Who knows that we should care about Legrand Lockwood? And why should we care about him? And he owned that painting. Legrand Lockwood owned the domes of Yosemite. This is when LeGrand Lockwood had made it. Here he is funding these guys to go off for art's sake. Goodness gracious, right on. And then he went bankrupt in 1869, shortly after this trip. And that is why the Domes of Yosemite is here, because he lost everything. The painting was auctioned. Horace Fairbanks bought it. So there's a real connection between Bradford's Arctic regions, funded by LeGrand Lockwood, in this painting. So that's a pretty neat thing. The text pages are, again, letterpress printed as single sheets. There are 129 pasted-in albumen photographs. This was one of the first really important books illustrated entirely with photography and not electroplated, not printing the photograph on the paper, but making photographs, pasting them into the book. There are only 300 copies of this book, and I can see why. That's a lot of work. But it's an important book for that reason. It's large, it's lavish, but it's also one of the first historical books to do this kind of illustration style. And some slides will follow of this. He had two professional photographers. Bradford is a painter, so he's going on this Arctic region because he says, I got to go to a place where I can paint the stuff or see the stuff I've never seen so I can make paintings. That's why he's going. But he brings along a scientist and he brings along two photographers because he's also thinking, well, I can produce a book. The book will partly fund the trip, but it'll be a great record of the trip. But though he writes all of the narrative in the book, it's essentially a travelogue. It's not like, boy, let me tell you, when I saw that iceberg, and then he gushes eloquently. He's really just saying, it was hard to get the cameras over the snow. 12 guys from the boat had to come and help us move the photography stuff. It's a travelogue. It's not about him enthusing about what he's going there for. He was obviously making lots of paintings and drawings, but it reads like a travelogue. Dr. Isaac Israel Hayes accompanied Bradford along with a crew of 29 to sail the steamer Panther. They went in 1869. The binding is a spectacular case, which you'll see in you'll see some slides here, and in a few minutes we'll go out there. In full brown goat leather. The case is embossed in blind, meaning impressed upon but no color added, just the impression of a tool. And then there's also gold embossing in the title, images, and decoration, which was done differently than the other books, and this will be a little easier to explain out there. The book is about this big. The image on the book is about this big. There was a brass plate exactly of the image that you'll see on the cover. So rather than little tools making up the cover image, a single brass plate was engraved. The book was placed in a giant steam-driven press. The brass plate is fixed to a platen. Down comes the platen on top of the book. With all that power, you get a tremendous image that you cannot do by hand. And what you'll see is this, not the brass plate, but the impression of it. And the gold is, in fact, real gold. The large plates are single leaves attached in an atlas structure. That is, this paper is so thick, it doesn't really drape on its own. So you turn the page, and it would have kind of stood up like this. So at the bottom of the page, next to the gutter of the book, there's a cloth hinge. So the paper is down, the big leaf comes up, it's hinging on this piece of cloth, and then it flops over on the other side. It's a pretty complex structure. I think it's the only thing that was going to work with the paper that was so stiff. Yeah, the leaves were thick and stiff. They wouldn't have draped. Only 300 copies were produced. And now some images, I think. That's next. So there's this really magnificent cover. So the image area, all of this is a single brass plate. And the book is this long. That was a big plate. Front and back look the same. This is a photo on the right of this attached construction. You can't see much other than something is happening right here. So the leaves are this way. There's a cloth hinge for each one attached to the stub, which is actually bound in there. And without that, I think it either would have broken off or it just would have been a really clumsy book to look at. There's the title page and an example of the tipped on, actually pasted on. Tipped on means you'd glue the top edge. Pasted is entirely glued to the page. There is its dedication to our friend, LeGrand Lockwood. That's what the explanation page looks like, a nice little photograph, and then the layout of the book is really lovely. There is an odd way of handling text around these center-mounted photographs. So you're reading along here, and it's pretty hard for me to read this, but you're reading this line, Dr. Hayes was agreeably surprised at finding old friends and acquaintances in the something of Reverend Mr. Anton, pastor of the settlement, his family, and his family who resided with him. The gentleman had formerly been stationed, then you read down to here, and this sentence, which is something about 15 miles northeast from, sorry, we can complete this, as the ship's company could not be himself, no, as the ship's company could not be spared from duty, Mr. Anton. It's like a graphic novel that should have arrows that say, go here, go up, and go over there. And every time there's a center photograph and the text is divided around it this way, the only other option would have been to jump from here to here. I think that would have been worse. But this is an odd thing about this book. I find it hard to read. It's a nice looking page. It's just, you got to get the cue about how to read this thing. Typical of the very big photographs, and again, these aren't prints, they are photographs pasted into the book. There's a single spread in the middle of one photograph spanning 2 pages. Again, you can see the typical, you'll have a bigger photo on the left, 2 smaller photos on the right, you'll reverse that. Again, each of the 2 small photos have that funny method of reading across the top, down one column, jump to the top of the other, continue down. And Bradford was a painter. These are a couple of his paintings. The one on the left, you know, translated from where I stole it online to the computer to the screen, it's probably a little less garish than that. He was actually a terrific landscape painter. The one on the right gives a better sense of his style. To me, I see landscape paintings in his work. But that's why he was actually going there. The book was produced because I guess he wanted to produce something with those 33 fellow members. But that's what Bradford was doing. He was a painter of maritime scenes, and that's from this trip. And that is it for in here. So now we're going to leave here, and we're going to go out there, and I think we're just big enough that it won't be too unwieldy to get up from here and look at the books. I'm going to show you some examples of how a more typical book, because these are not terribly typical, would be bound. And I'm going to go from 3 or 4 stations I set up out there. I'm going to sit in one spot and do something and sit in another spot. I'll be quick about that, and then we're going to get to the fun part, which is the cleaning of your hands on your clothing and looking at the books. Everybody gets a piece of paper. So if you just pass me, just take one and just pass, you just need one. And then we're going to do something with it. So if you remember nothing else, you'll have something to take with you. And this will be like, oh yeah, I remember we did that thing with the piece of newspaper. That was great. May I have one when you're going around? I forgot to say one for myself. I think I have enough. There's probably 50 pieces here, so just keep them moving way back there so everybody gets one. And then just hold it so you can read it front or back, doesn't matter, just so that you can read the print. And then take your little piece of paper on either side and go in like 1/4 of an inch and rip a strip straight down the sheet. And if you do it slowly, try to rip it the whole way. Worth the price of admission right there. Okay, so now turn it 90 degrees. So you can't read the print. And do the same thing, or try to do the same thing. And it gets a little red. And I'm doing it with the same piece of paper to prove that this is not magic. I don't have a different piece of paper. Now I know you've all done this 1,000 times. You have a newspaper and you rip an article out or a photograph or something. One direction, when you can read this piece of paper, and this is not magic to this piece of paper, this is not special magic paper or special newspaper, this is a standard issue. When you hold the paper so that you can read the print, and you can tear a strip real neat and real thin, that's because most of the grain on this paper is running this way. Most of the fibers are running down this piece of paper, and only a few of them are running the other way. And when you tear this piece of paper, you're tearing very few fibers, essentially. You're mostly tearing between the fibers. You're tearing like this. When you turn it the other way, you're tearing like this. And if nothing else, when you open a book, and it is very annoyingly, unsatisfyingly unable to open, and let's pick an example, because most modern books are crappy. And I don't know which way this paper is running. That's not terrible. Didn't exactly, yeah, there, that's serving my purpose, more like that. I don't know which way the paper grain is running in this book. It should be running in every book that is ever made anywhere, was or shall be. The grain should be running this way. And then the paper drapes very nicely this way. And when the grain is running this way, the leaves tend to stand up. So again, this is the way you want it running, like this. Like you're reading your newspaper and the paper grain is running down the page. And when the books are printed with the grain running that way, they make very unhappy books. This is 90% of the business right here. If the paper grain is right, the book is going to be happy. It's going to work better because most of the fibers are going to lay over. They're going to be like your fingers, like this. And they're going to lay over nicely. And when they're like this, the leaves want to stand up like that. So when you're making your next book, or buying it, not that you have any control over this, but you want to. And when you find a book which is really annoyingly unsatisfying, often it is the paper grain is going the wrong way. So I know you're going to remember that, because you can keep your souvenir. So now I'm going to pretend I'm making a book, and I'm not going to make it because I thought, originally I was going to try to make one in the course of this evening. I was going to try to get one in the press, and I thought, that's not going to work, man. Don't even go there. But I'm going to pretend that I'm making it. This book that I just showed you is probably not printed on a little piece of paper this size. It's printed on a piece of paper, I don't know, maybe this size, with the pages laid out in an order, and the other side is printed simultaneously on a press. That's how books are printed now, so they're not printing every single sheet separately. And then, I just want to see which way the grain runs here. It runs the long way. So then, the piece of paper, after it's all printed, is put in a big machine, but it used to be done by hand, and people still did things. Then it's folded, and then it's folded the other way. And to make things happy in hand binding, if you fold too many times, the end gets all crunched up. So you cut a little bit of the folded side like that. And then it would be easier to fold that piece of the paper again. And then, again, down in the middle of the fold. And this is coming out smaller than that book, obviously. I didn't quite finish cutting that. You slit it a little beyond halfway, because then you can fold another piece of paper relatively neatly in half. So if this was a book that was going to be this size and this shape with the fold in the middle there that you would be sewing through, I would have folded a single piece of paper enough times to make the sheet the size of the book. So here are some printed sections as yet unsewn. They have just enough of a connection left that you can see how this sheet started its life. And then it was folded, and then it was folded again. And then each of these sheets, and in fact, I think this is a copy of a book that I found, didn't print or anything else, but this is a Steinauer press imprint. And this was one of the copies I started with to work out how this was going to come together. So I got the sheets, folded the sheets, poked the holes in the sheet. This is an end paper. You won't really be able to see this, but I've already poked holes through the fold in the middle of this. Old-fashioned style with an awl, by hand, every single hole. So as many as I needed. Had I done that with, I think this was an edition of like 125 copies. So folded everyone, punched everyone, came over to the sewing frame, put the whole pile down on the sewing frame and sit like this, and take a section and go to the middle and put it down on the frame because my sewing supports are already here, and then I'm sewing in and out. And then I'm taking the next section, and I'm going to the center of that section, and I'm adding it on, all lined up nicely. And I'm sewing from this end where I just came out, back in, around my sewing supports, and out this end. And I'm taking the next sheet, and you're doing this in order so you're not binding the book backwards or in an incorrect order. And I have seen those. I have a few in my collection. And again, I finished on this end, so I'm back in, I'm out, I'm around my sewing supports, carry on till the entire thing is finished. That is, it's sewn. I leave the sewing frame, and I come over to here. So now my book is sewn together, but it's just a loose conglomeration of sections. I would put it in a press, like this. This is a teaching model I used to use at the University of Iowa, so I have a bunch of descriptors of what I was teaching all the students to do. So in my case, using this equipment, I would put my sewn book in this press, and this press normally sits at my house in a tub, so I have a big table with a hole in the middle, and the press sits in the middle of the tub with an opening below it, so any size book will fit in there. And I have lined it up really carefully. And when the book came out of this press, I actually attached this one. I should have done. And these are tapes, these are cords, same thing, different style. So right now this book has no lining on the spine, it's sewn together, but there's not much else that's holding it together. So this kind of loosey-goosey thing goes in here. And right now the spine is still pretty flat. And what I want is a round spine. So I glue up the spine and I start forcing the book into the shape I want. I want it to be round in the back because that will actually hold its shape better. So I put it in here, and then to make it much rounder, the hammer, and then you start going like this. You're knocking in this oblique angle on the shoulders of the book, sort of like both sides, and you're bending the shoulders down on these brass edges in this case. Once you've achieved the shape you want, a bunch of paper linings so that the book retains its shape. So we pretend that that part's done and the book's all glued up, so it's still just a text block, but it's solid now. It'll keep its shape. It's full of paper linings. This is from 1732, I think. This is a book with wooden boards, and I collect lots of books, but I collect books that don't have covers on them because this is all I really want to see, this part. This is my favorite book, and I will let you handle it. Wooden boards, and that's why we call them boards, because they used to be. Cords on the spine right here, akin to these. So in this case, there would have been 4 cords here. That's what you're seeing on this spine. So the book would have been here against the cords, sewn onto this, into this shape. The wooden boards were, and I have this band on here because it's getting a little weak. I use this model a lot, and it's actually getting weak. Holes are drilled in the board, and the excess cord is sewn. The boards are sewn on, so the boards are really linked to the text block, so they really form a unit. And when I said in there, the hubs on a book were not, they were decorative, not real. When you look at a book that has a raised spine, it's the leather which is actually going over these raised bands. They're not fake. If you press a piece of leather right down on this, you're going to see a shape that looks like that, with a hump and a hump and a hump and a hump. That was handy for dividing the spine for titling. Later people said, skip the bands, man, just put the humps on. Put fake humps on. So that's possible, and that's what all of these books have. They're not real humps. In fact, I can show you. This is the grammar of ornament. These are not real humps. These are not the chords. These are just built up fakos. Because it works. It makes a lovely demarcation on the spine. And if you divide the spine up evenly, normally you've got a little more space here than the other places. You've got titling, decoration spaces. So it's a byproduct of actual function, but it became a style that was valuable. So then I take my, let's say this is my book with its boards attached, and I come over to this station, and I have to figure out what am I going to cover the book in. So in the case of this book, and again there's some similarity here of the way the spine looks, and the little humps on this book are real, they are not fake. They're showing the bands here. Here is the non-vegetarian portion of the program. That's a real goat skin. That's how they look when they come to you as a binder. You can see a mark right down the middle of the spine of this piece of leather. That was the goat's spine. So here was the backbone. Right about there. There are the little legs. So head was out here, tail here. So I hope that little vegetarian warning was enough. They're tanned. And you can feel this just to see what the weight of this is generally. So a piece of leather was cut out for this book. It was bound entirely. It's a single piece of leather. This is a German prayer book. It has no labeling, probably intentional. This was the style that seemed useful for this book. Now, I'm just going to grab the press from over here, and I'll be right back. So the book has been bound in some material. So, actually, I shouldn't really mess with it. So we'll take this book. So we're going to decorate it. This one was intentionally left plain. So it would go into the press, like this. So the spine is presenting up. You have an iron, which is heated. You have tools on the iron when they get to be the right temperature. You can do a couple of things. You can tool leather without any gold. And if I ran this tool hard, heated on this piece of leather, you'd see the impression of this tool. You wouldn't see color because there wouldn't be any color there. So you can do what's called blind embossing or blind stamping, in which case this heated tool, you would press it on here and run it across the spine of the book. If I wanted color on there the way I do it, there are lots of ways to do this, but I would take something like this piece of foil, which I put on these two pieces of paper. I would secure it actually to the press, not to the book. But I would have the foil fitted around the spine of the book. It would be held in place by tape. Again, I would take my heated tool and press through the foil like this. And with the right temperature and the right dwell, that is moving the tool at the right rate, when you take this off, you'll have beautiful blind tooling on the spine. That's how everything on the spine of these books is done. This is Robert's Egypt and Nubia. So all of this tooling was done by putting this very large book in a much bigger press, taking individual tools and making all these impressions. And this label and this one were added separately, probably put on the book and then tooled right over the spine. But that's how that would be done. And that is, in a nutshell, all of the steps of printing, folding, sewing, etc. And the work is generally broken up into two parts. It's called forwarding, which is getting the book to the point where it's not covered. It looks like this. This book is fully forwarded. This is just the term you use in this practice. Then it is finished. It is covered and it is decorated if it's going to be decorated. And the work in workshops tended to be, you were a forwarder, and those were the people who were extremely skilled and not going to get all the credit. And the finisher was going to get all the credit, who was extremely talented, because if you got it all the way to that point and then you screwed it up, that would stink. But the design is what most people see in a binding. They don't really see everything that went in to get it to this point, which is all the work. And that's a lot of work, but it's decoration. But those are the basic ways the work is broken down in these two phases. So now, everyone remembers. And you can touch all of this stuff. Again, this is fine if you do it aggressively. Remember not to do this and then pick up the books. Do this first, or do this. And if you use these, just leave them on the table, because we actually will use them for cleaning furniture and stuff. You can just throw them on the table. I don't want to waste them all.
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit about how you put the leather on the boards? Is it glued?
Yeah, I did kind of skip right over that part. Traditionally, bookbinding materials were all natural, so you're using paste, which is flour or starch, or you're using hide glue, which is coming from bits of skin, hooves, other stuff. Now, conservation people use paste. Some people use hide glue. It doesn't remain as flexible. But in conservation, you want to be able to reverse what you're doing. Paste is water soluble. You're not going to wreck the book undoing what you did, or somebody in 100 years isn't going to wreck the book undoing what you did. If you're doing a book, all of these books that are on the shelves, they're all done with hot melt glue and permanent adhesives and stuff that would never come off unless you soak it in gasoline, well, a solvent. When I make book boxes, not the book itself, but a box of the books, I would use white polyvinyl acetate emulsion, which is Elmer's glue with a plasticizer. It stays flexible, it's a synthetic, it has great properties of openness, that is, it stays wet for a while. If you had to reverse that stuff, sort of forget about it, it's not going to work. But traditionally it was paste or it was hide glue. Now it's a mix of synthetics and hide glue, a little bit of hide glue and some paste.
Do you have to use different glues depending whether it's leather, cloth, or paper binding?
Yeah, when you work with leather, you want just paste, because you get this stuff practically mushy. You're really working the paste in, and paste has a long open time. It doesn't dry very fast. So when this book was in the press, when it's going to be finished, it's going to be covered. You actually would probably start having it in here. You would have pasted out your leather repeatedly. You cut a piece for the whole book. So then you take that piece and you press it down on the spine and you work it across the boards. And in the case, these nails are actually in here so that I can take a piece of cord. In fact, it's actually on here. And if there was leather on here, I would be running this cord around the leather on one side of this little band and around the other, so you make really tight impressions, and you're doing this across every band on the book, because otherwise the leather's not going to stick and it's going to come off. But then you've got to put it in the press and leave it for days, because the paste dries really slowly. But that's all you use with leather. You can use glue. It dries too fast. It doesn't penetrate the skin before it starts to dry. You want this to be as pliable as possible, but it's time consuming, which is why all of these practices have been changed to something else. So I'm sorry, I never did ask about any other questions along the way.
Speaking of time consuming, typically how many person hours would there be binding a book?
Like back when that was made, there would have been a factory, and it would have been divided up. So if there were going to be 1,000 copies of that book, all the copies were printed, and then every single copy was going through a station. I actually can't answer in any kind of accurate way, but it was still process work. So it isn't one person taking book from this point to the end of the forwarding part, and then one person taking it from forwarding to finishing. It's 20 of those people and maybe 5 of these people, because finishing was really a specialty. But it didn't seem like, oh, this is so crazy time consuming that no wonder it went out of fashion. It was simply the demand for books drove different styles of binding, not really that this was such a crazy labor intensive practice that you couldn't wait for it to end.
A simpler question. There's a lot of old books up there. Suppose you want to repair one of them. What sort of materials do you use to repair kind of old books?
Depending on what, if it had a cloth binding, I would use cloth. If it had leather, I would use leather if I thought it was worth it. If it was an important book, you want to try to keep it in its style. If it is something that eventually you can see you're going to discard it, you're going to withdraw it from the collection, I would make a cloth binding, because cloth is pretty strong. Well-made book cloth is pretty strong. And I would, again, I always use a layer of a reversible adhesive on the spine. So if somebody in 100 years says, oh man, that book now is really valuable, there's only 2 copies left, they could take apart what I did to it, get it down to this point, and with some really viscous like wallpaper paste, apply that, take off the material I put on, and then start over. Because if I use a synthetic adhesive on this, forget it. It's never coming off. You'll have to disassemble the book and break all its parts. And you can't really undo that stuff.
Well, something that's very common with older books is, the glue dries, and then the cover kind of tears, so the board, if that's the right word, is sort of hanging off. So it needs a repair, but it's not a priceless thing like that, but it's something you want to keep.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd probably do a cloth repair. If the spine is still intact but it's detached,
Yeah,
I would make a cloth case and I would remount the original spine, just glue it back on in place,
I see,
saving the original parts as much as possible.
I see.
And
When you say cloth tape, is it some specialized book binding material? Or
there is book cloth. It's just a heavy weave, and often it's paper lined, so the adhesive won't travel through the cloth. Because even a tight weave on cloth, if you put too much adhesive on, it's going to come right to the top side, and it's going to either discolor or make it shiny. And book cloth tends to be paper lined, so the adhesive stays there. It doesn't travel through the cloth.
Okay, so there's book cloth. Is there also book paste that you would use for this hypothetical?
I would use either wheat paste or which you can make just from flour, heating it up, or PVA, polyvinyl acetate. Elmer's glue that stays flexible. So I do want you to have time to look at these books. Again, don't forget that part. And so over here is, and I'm going to put it back on its bumpers. And again, safe handling of books, any old book and a lot of new books. If you had a book you could hold in your hand, this is really too big for that. Especially if you go into a bookshop and somebody's watching you, and you might or not buy the book, don't whack it right open. Hold it in your hand and open it a little bit. Open it enough so that you can see what you want to see. You can see the title page if you're looking at that. You can see in the book. You won't be the one who breaks the binding. If you open it right up and it's an old book, you're going to own it. So with these things, it's especially important. This is the book that I said was adhesive bound. You will see that a section of this book is in fact coming out. But I'm going to leave it on these bumpers, like that. Again, do that with paper towel. And feel free to flip through it. The book has tissue guards in front of the plates. So the tissue guards are very light, and some in fact are detached. Be careful of those, keep them in place. But you can see beautiful illustrations in this book. That's enough of that one. You can see the text here, so we'll leave that one like that. This is the David Roberts book. Again, keep it on its bumpers. Again, marbled paper sides. A lot of foxing in this book, this book probably got damp, and this is a stain that results from a fungus. It's dead, so there's no threat to us. Full page lithographs, again, feel free to turn the pages carefully. Always keep your hands clean.
How old is that book, please, Bob?
This one,
About
1848. This is the oldest of the three. Here's David Roberts' introduction. There are beautiful plates in here. These are the typical full-size plates. They're beautiful. So the image is printed in black, and then there is a tint of this tan and a tint of this blue. But again, feel free, just gently. This one also has some guards in places, and feel free to look at that one. And then the Jumbotron of books. This is the one that has all of the glued-in photographs. It's a certain type of photography making, and it's actually albumin, which is part of the treatment of the paper to hold the light-sensitive chemicals. So, especially on the book with the photographs, do not touch the photos, even if your hands are really clean, because it'll probably make a mark. But again, feel free to look through it and get a sense of what's in here, and have at it. And if I can answer questions about tools or the books, I'll try. And otherwise, just feel free.